Temptation doesn't sound like a social justice issue, but we can be tempted away from anything that God asks us to do, and so we can be tempted away from living justly. It can often feel like Jesus just asks too much of us. Give without expecting in return. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Lay down your life and follow me. He even says, don't worry about food or clothes or your body, but seek first your heavenly Father's kingdom and righteousness. It's a serious temptation to feel like these commands are just too hard to keep. It's not that we don't want to love or give or serve, but it's not clear how we can do these things that he's asking us to do. They're just hard. There's a temptation to not live justly, and it tells us that Jesus' commands are too hard to keep, even unreasonable. So how do we move on from that point? I think our initial response is often just to grit our teeth and try and get on with it. But I don't think that's the best response. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul is telling the church in Corinth about the churches in Macedonia. He says that out of the most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability. As his prime example of giving, Paul picks a church that give out of overwhelming joy. And that is just wonderful. They were so overjoyed at what Jesus had done for them, at the grace he had shown them, at the eternity he had opened up before them, that they gave even more than they could afford to give. I get the sense that all senses of pressure and effort and burden just faded away from them and became nothing to them. And I think that is how we need to overcome the temptation to not live justly. Not just to struggle against the temptation, but to replace it with joy. Something Christians for thousands of years have testified to is that Jesus is more satisfying than anything he asks us to give up. His grace, which frees us from earthly ties, is much, much more powerful than any temptation or fear of temptation which tries to bind us. I think if we focus just a bit less on the temptation itself and a bit more on Jesus himself, we'll find that these temptations to not live justly just fade away. When we look at Jesus and all that he's done for us, and when we come to him and learn from him, we find that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. It's good to keep his commands, and in doing so we find rest for our souls.